My brother dropped his suitcase in my house and announced, "I'm taking the master bedroom." I calmly told him, "You can share the guest room with mom and dad, or you can leave." When my parents took his side, I asked all three of them to leave my house immediately. Hello everyone. Before we start, thank you so much for being part of our journey. Our next goal is to reach 200 subscribers by the end of this month. If you enjoy our stories, please subscribe and help us achieve this milestone. My name is Lauren Mitchell. I'm 36 years old, and my older brother tried to claim my bedroom before he'd even taken his shoes off. He carried his suitcase upstairs, walked into my master bedroom, dropped his bag beside my bed, looked around with a satisfied smile, then loudly announced, "I'm taking the master bedroom." I honestly thought he was joking. I laughed until he opened my closet, started hanging up his shirts. I calmly said, "Jason, that's my room," without even turning around. He answered, "It is now." Before I could respond, my mother walked into the hallway, smiled, and said, "He's your older brother. Show some respect." 5 minutes later, my father expected me to move my own clothes into the guest room. Instead, I quietly walked downstairs, unlocked the front door, opened it, looked at all three of them, and calmly said, "Then all of you need to leave." None of them believed I was serious. Looking back, neither did I, not until they forced me to choose between keeping peace and keeping my self-respect. I grew up in a family where my older brother always came first. Jason was 3 years older than me. Growing up, he got the larger bedroom, the newer clothes, the better birthday gifts. Whenever I complained, Mom smiled. "He's older." Whenever Jason wanted something, Dad usually found a way to make it happen. When he wanted a car at 16, Dad bought him one. When I turned 16, I got permission to borrow Mom's old sedan twice a week. When Jason struggled in college, my parents paid another year of tuition. When I earned a scholarship, Dad smiled proudly. "We knew you'd figure it out." That sentence followed me everywhere. "You'll figure it out." And eventually, I did. After college, I became an interior designer. The first few years were difficult. Long hours, small clients, late payments. There were months when I questioned every decision I'd ever made. But I kept going. One recommendation became another. Small projects became luxury homes. Eventually, I opened my own design studio. 3 years later, I bought my first house. Nothing extravagant, just a beautiful 2-story home with a large kitchen, a sunny reading room, and one master bedroom that represented every sacrifice I'd made. Every mortgage payment came from my own work. Every piece of furniture, every coat of paint, every plant in the backyard. I'd chosen myself. For the first time in my life, I had a space that truly belonged to me. My parents congratulated me. Jason barely mentioned it. "Nice house." That was all he said. Months later, Mom called, "Honey, we need a favor." "What kind?" "Your aunt is celebrating her 70th birthday. Hotels are completely booked. Could your father, Jason, and I stay with you for 3 nights?" Of course, I genuinely meant it. I spent 2 full days preparing. Fresh towels, new sheets, extra toiletries. I even stocked the refrigerator with everyone's favorite foods. The guest room had a queen-sized bed. The upstairs office had a comfortable pull-out sofa. It wasn't luxurious, but everyone would be comfortable. Friday afternoon, their SUV pulled into my driveway. I hugged Mom. Dad carried luggage inside. Jason barely said hello. Instead, he picked up his suitcase, looked around, then asked, "Which room is mine?" I smiled. "The guest room upstairs." He nodded casually, then walked upstairs. A few moments later, I heard a door open, then another, then silence. I walked upstairs and stopped. Jason stood inside my bedroom. His suitcase sat beside my bed. He was opening dresser drawers. "What are you doing?" He looked completely relaxed. "I'm taking the master." I laughed. "No, seriously, so am I." He shrugged. "I always sleep in the biggest room." I blinked. "Not in my house." He smiled. "Come on, you don't need all this space." Before I answered, Mom appeared behind me. She looked into the bedroom, then smiled. "Oh, that actually makes sense." I stared at her. "What?" "Jason should have the larger room. He's older." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "This is my bedroom." Dad slowly climbed the stairs. "What's going on?" Mom answered before I could. "Lauren's refusing to let Jason stay in the master." Dad looked at me. "Why?" "Because it's my room." He sighed. "It's only for a few nights." I quietly answered. "So the guest room is?" Jason sat on the edge of my bed. "This mattress is incredible. I'll sleep great here." I folded my arms. "No." He laughed. "Don't be dramatic." Mom looked disappointed. "Lauren, you've always been generous. This isn't generosity. It's my bedroom." Dad frowned, I don't understand why you're making such a big deal. I took a slow breath, then calmly pointed toward the guest room. You can sleep there. Jason shook his head. I'm staying here. No, I am. He looked at my parents. See, she's impossible. Mom immediately nodded. This is exactly why family gatherings become stressful. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because somehow, I'd once again become the problem inside my own house. Dad looked directly at me. I expect you to respect your older brother, I answered quietly. I have, my entire life. But respecting him doesn't mean giving him my bedroom. Mom crossed her arms. Then you sleep in the guest room. I stared at her. You want me to move out of my own bedroom? She looked genuinely confused. It's only temporary. I slowly looked around the room. The room I'd dreamed about for years. The room I'd worked so hard to afford. Then, without another word, I walked downstairs, crossed the living room, unlocked the front door, pulled it open. The cool afternoon air drifted inside. My parents and Jason followed me downstairs. Dad frowned. What are you doing? I looked at all three of them, then calmly said, if none of you can respect that this is my home, then all three of you need to leave. The entire house fell silent. Jason laughed. Mom smiled nervously. Dad shook his head. None of them believed I would actually ask them to leave. They were wrong. Sometimes, the hardest boundary you'll ever set isn't against strangers. It's against the people who spent years convincing themselves they were entitled to everything you worked to build. As my brother stood in my hallway smiling, like I would eventually give in, and my parents waited for me to apologize, I reached for the front door and realized someone was about to leave that house, but it wasn't going to be me. The front door remained open. Cool afternoon air drifted into the living room. Nobody moved. Jason laughed. Oh, come on. You're not serious. I calmly looked at him. I've never been more serious. Mom folded her arms. Lauren, stop being dramatic. I smiled politely. I'm not. I'm protecting my home. Dad sighed loudly. We drove 3 hours to get here. I know. And I prepared guest rooms for all of you. Jason shrugged. I'm still taking the master. I shook my head. No. He looked around confidently. What are you going to do? Physically drag me out? I quietly reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and unlocked it. Jason's smile faded. What are you doing? I'm giving you one final opportunity. Either take the guest room or leave. Mom stepped forward. You wouldn't call the police on your own family. I looked at her calmly. I hope I don't have to. Silence. Dad tried a different approach. It's only for 3 nights. I answered gently. No. It's about every time I was told to give up something because Jason wanted it. The room became quiet. I continued. My bedroom, my birthday presents, my opportunities, my voice. Not anymore. Jason rolled his eyes. So this is about your childhood? No. This is about today. You walked into my house and decided my bedroom belonged to you. He laughed again. I was kidding. I looked directly at him. Then why are your clothes hanging in my closet? He didn't answer. Because they were. Dad rubbed his forehead. Jason, move your things. Jason looked shocked. What? I said, move your things. Mom immediately interrupted. Frank, we're really choosing her over him. Dad quietly looked around the house, then looked back at me. No, we're choosing reality. The room fell silent. Jason stared at Dad. You've got to be kidding. Dad slowly shook his head. This isn't our house. It's Lauren's. And she's right. For the first time in my life, my father had said those words. Jason slammed the closet door. This is unbelievable. He grabbed his shirts, stuffed them back into his suitcase, then muttered, You've changed. I smiled softly. No, I finally stopped apologizing. Mom still looked furious. I can't believe you'd embarrass your own brother. I answered quietly. I didn't. He embarrassed himself the moment he claimed someone else's bedroom. Dad picked up one of the suitcases. He looked at the guest room. Is this really where we're staying? I smiled. Fresh sheets, clean towels, extra blankets. I spent 2 days getting everything ready. He looked genuinely surprised. You did all this? Of course. I wanted you to feel welcome, not entitled. He slowly nodded. I understand. Jason, however, grabbed his suitcase. I'm getting a hotel. Dad looked at him. I thought they were all booked. Jason looked away. I'm sure I'll find something. Without another word, he walked out the front door. Mom hesitated, then followed him. As she reached the driveway, she stopped, turned around, and looked at me. I still think you're overreacting. I simply smiled. I hope you both find a nice hotel. She stood there for several seconds, waiting for me to change my mind. I didn't. Finally, she got back into the SUV beside Jason. They drove away. The driveway became quiet. Dad remained standing in my living room, holding his overnight bag. He looked exhausted. I'd still like to stay. I nodded. The guest room is ready. He smiled sadly. I think, child, that's exactly where a guest belongs. That evening, we ate dinner together, just the two of us. For the first time in years, we had a real conversation. No comparisons, no interruptions, no Jason. Halfway through dinner, Dad quietly said, I owe you an apology. I looked up. For what? For teaching your brother that everything belonged to him, and teaching you that giving in was the same as being kind. He paused. I failed both of you. I didn't answer immediately. Because for the first time, he wasn't making excuses. He was taking responsibility. The next morning, there was another knock at my door. Jason stood outside, holding a small garment bag. He looked uncomfortable. I came to apologize. I waited. He took a deep breath. I've spent my whole life assuming I'd always get first choice. I never realized. Someone taught me that. I nodded. I know. I'm sorry. And? The guest room okay. I smiled. It has always been okay. He laughed awkwardly. I'll take it. Epilogue, 2 years have passed. My parents never again assumed they could make decisions inside my home. Now, whenever they visit, Dad always asks, which room would you like us to use? I always smile. The guest room, he laughs. Exactly. Jason changed too. Not overnight, but gradually. He stopped expecting people to accommodate him, started asking instead of assuming. One Christmas, he arrived carrying his suitcase. He looked toward the staircase, then grinned. Guest room? I laughed. You remembered. I'll never forget. Later that evening, he quietly handed me a small wrapped gift. Inside was a wooden plaque. It simply read, Home. Across the bottom, he had engraved one sentence. Thank you for teaching me the difference between being welcomed and being entitled. I still keep it in my entryway. Every guest who walks through my front door sees it, not because it reminds me of the argument, because it reminds me that peace begins the moment you stop surrendering your boundaries to keep other people comfortable. My thoughts. Looking back, the hardest word I ever said wasn't leave. It was no. Because for years, I'd been taught that saying no made me selfish. It didn't. It made me self-respecting. Your home should be the one place where you never have to compete for your own space. The people who truly love you won't expect you to give up your bed, your peace, or your dignity just to avoid conflict. Sometimes, the strongest lock on your front door isn't the one made of steel. It's the boundary you finally decide to keep.